Off the back of the Persona 3 Reload announcement, the discussion of what Persona games might get the remake treatment next has been in full swing. I personally feel like it's a bit premature at this point, since we won't even get Reload until the beginning of next year, and the steps Atlus makes after that might entirely be dependent on what the reception is to that game. I would be genuinely shocked if Reload is a failure, at least commercially given the massive success of most recent Atlus games. I can definitely see the fan response to the game being divisive based on the changes made or not made. We won't know for sure how the game is received until we can actually play it ourselves. Because of that, I do think people should be a bit careful about hype for games that may never end up even being made. However, it is also fun to speculate on what future remakes, if any, there will be, and based on a recent rumor, it seems like Persona 1, 2, and 2 remakes could be the next step for the series. Now, since this is just a rumor, we should take it with a pretty massive amount of salt. I'll believe the first 3 Persona games are being remade when I can actually see them for myself. Until then, this is all strictly speculative. The idea of those games getting remade is something I find really interesting due to the pretty significant differences between what Persona was and what it is now. For those of you who don't know, the social links / confidants that make up half the gameplay of the modern Persona games were first introduced in Persona 3. The first 3 games had nothing like that. Beyond that, the combat was more grid-based, and the demon negotiation system utilized in most SMT games played an important part in the gameplay loop. Persona 5 had a pretty similar version of this mechanic present, but it was very simplified. The differences aren't all as big as those, but it does make the original 3 games feel almost like a completely separate series than the latter 3. This puts the remakes of Persona 1 and 2 in a very exciting position. They would be bringing the original Persona concept back and presenting it to the modern Persona audience. If Atlus does end up remaking the roots of the series, then how much of what the series grew into will be adapted? Will they try to make them feel more like the modern games, or just stay as close to the originals as they can? The original Persona Trilogy was never very big in the West. Persona 3 and 4 were moderate hits, but the series didn't fully take off until Persona 5 came along and launched the series into mainstream success all over the world. So many current Persona fans first got into the series thanks to Persona 5, Max and myself included, and Atlus has to be very aware of that. Even Shin Megami Tensei 5 seemed to take some cues from Persona 5 in terms of reaching a larger audience. Don't get me wrong, I liked SMT 5, but it did feel like the edges of the series had been softened in order to appeal to more people. I feel like even Soul Hackers 2 development was impacted by the success of Persona 5, and again, I liked that game, but it has a much cleaner presentation and vibe than the more grungy Cyberpunk original. I mention all this because Persona 5 is Atlus's best-selling game, having sold over 7.2 million copies in total. That includes the royal re-releases, but still. The softer edge approach they took with Shin Megami Tensei 5 also paid off because the game sold over 1 million copies by April 2022. Soul Hackers 2 was kind of a commercial failure, but still, my point stands. Persona 5 is Atlus's most successful game to date, and it makes a lot of sense for Atlus to mold future decisions around that fact. The increased success of the series even carried over to the remaster of the best Shin Megami Tensei game, Nocturne. Despite being only a remaster rather than a remake, the game still managed to sell over 600,000 copies in just 2 years. That is amazing for 2 reasons. For one, it gives me hope for the Digital Devil duology to get a remaster at some point, and that's all I want in this life. And for 2, because it showed that classic Atlus still has a place in modern gaming. What does that have to do with this video? Well, I think the success of SMT3's remaster could mean that the original Persona Trilogy can also still do well if given the similar treatment. Now, the rumor suggests that the games are being considered to be completely remade, rather than just remastered or ported. Since it is a remake, Atlus could get a little wild with how much of the original game they change. They really could completely rebuild and rework Persona 1, 2, and 2 to fall more in line with the more modern games. It could even go as far as adding in social links or some variation on them, or as simple as changing the aesthetics and gameplay style to be more in line with Persona 5. Much like Reload. I think the aesthetics / gameplay thing is almost guaranteed, while the social links thing would be a much bigger undertaking. I haven't played the first 3 Persona games myself, but from what I have seen, it seems like fitting the typical social link formula into those games would mean modifying the story and how it plays out in significant ways. I'm not totally convinced that they would do that, but it does remain a possibility. At that point, the question becomes, should they do that? Should they change the original trilogy in any way, big or small, to appeal more to the modern Persona fans, or should they stay true to the original vision? I personally don't think any major changes would be necessary or really benefit the remakes. The success of Shin Megami Tensei 3 Remaster shows that new fans are open to what the classic games had to offer, and I think that would carry over to the Persona series too. Plus, fans of the originals love those games for what they are, and giving them the cold shoulder in order to appeal to more newer fans would be pretty whack. Not that that would surprise me coming from Atlus. If that does end up being the case, then the very least they could do would be to make the original games more accessible, be that with a port or a remaster of some kind. Actually, they should just do that anyway. On the flip side of all that, these being remakes rather than just ports or remasters does give Atlus the perfect chance to reinvent the games entirely, through the lens of modern gaming and modern Persona. I don't have any nostalgia for the first 3 Persona games, so it honestly doesn't make much of a difference to me either way, but Atlus could end up shooting themselves in the foot if they're not careful. These potential Persona remakes could end up appealing to neither old fans or new fans if they go too far trying to appease everyone. And that is part of what makes these potential remakes so interesting to me. The Persona 3 remake is, in my eyes, a very safe choice. It's old enough that a remake makes sense while not being massively different enough from Persona 5 that it would require any reinvention. They don't really have to take any risks with it, and based on what we've seen from it so far, it doesn't seem like they are. On the other hand, a Persona 1 and 2 remake is inherently a risk due to how much the series has changed in the last 20 plus years. I don't think it would make too much of a difference to new fans if it stayed true to the original, but I could be completely wrong about that. If new school Persona fans don't vibe with the remakes, then they probably won't do as well and could end up as commercial failures. But, only time will tell.
Hi, Max here. I'm a little nervous if Atlus focuses too much on things that didn't catch on originally. To ride the wave of popularity that Persona 5 brought, they might make ripples but not the big splash that they could. It could scare new Atlus fans from the franchise as a whole, even though Persona 6 most likely would come out before any potential remake of Persona 1 or 2. With any new remake, Atlus needs to continue to add on to the things that work and do well. If the OG Persona remakes are a version of that, then I'll be happy to play those. But since the OG Persona games are so different, if they keep them the exact same, Atlus risks losing out on baby Persona fans like me, especially with the big price tag that the games are bringing. Maybe that is another video we will talk about in the future of why remakes should in turn be cheaper than brand new games that come up.
Like I said earlier, this is all speculation, and who knows what Atlus will end up doing. Maybe in a few years, everything I said here will be completely wrong and irrelevant, but for now, I think it's an interesting topic. Any Persona fans watching this, give me your thoughts in the comments below. I'm curious to what other people think about this. Is this Atlus's chance to reinvent what Persona's origins were and connect them more to what the series became? Or should this remake just be that? A remake that stays as close to the original as possible while bringing it to more modern systems with better visuals? Or something in between. Whatever it ends up being, if it even ends up happening, I will definitely be sure to check it out. It'll be fascinating to see no matter what they do. I do plan on covering the first 3 Persona games on this channel at some point, so if you want to see that, then subscribe. Max and I also recently discussed our thoughts on the Persona 3 remake and all of that stuff, so you can check that out if you're interested. In the meantime, I'm Tin from Tin and Max. Thanks for watching, we hope you got something out of this, and we will see you in whatever we do next.